Chapter 21 is focusing on the battles of the Civil War from 1861 to 1865. Now, after it was determined that war was going to happen, and after the battle at Fort Sumter, Lincoln really expected this to be a 90-day war, a very quick war, in and out. He had no purpose, directly or indirectly, to interfere with slavery where it exists. He figured 90 days was all it was going to take to go in and restore the Union, because remember, at the beginning of the war, that is the primary goal, is to restore the Union. The public was demanding action, and so in the summer of 1861, an army was sent to attack a small band of Confederate forces at the Battle of Bull Run. Southerners call this the Battle of Manassas Junction. The hope was that if the Union was successful at Bull Run, then the next step would be to attack Richmond, which was only 100 miles to the south, that it would be a quick and easy restoration of the Union, and the war would be over and done with. The problem was that the Union Army encountered one of the greatest generals the Confederacy ever had, was Stonewall Jackson. Stonewall Jackson, sure, he started out as a small force, but he quickly received reinforcements in the field. And so we see a Union defeat at the Battle of Bull Run. Now, even though this was a victory for the Confederacy, in the long run it ended up hurting the Confederacy more than it helped them, because this quick battle, and this quick victory, I should say, made them more overconfident, and many soldiers actually deserted after Bull Run, thinking that the war was over, that the Confederacy had lost. For the Union, though, they started to realize after the battle at Bull Run that this was not going to be a quick victory, and it was going to take time and to refocus their attentions. Okay, here you see Stonewall Jackson. So, like we talked about in Chapter 20, Lincoln went through a lot of generals before he found a general that he actually liked. The first general in charge of the Army of the Potomac was George McClellan. The Army of the Potomac is just one of the armies in the field for the Union, and it gets probably the most press or the most notoriety because it is the army closest to D.C., protecting the capital of D.C. So George McClellan is one of the Army generals in charge of the Army of the Potomac. He was a West Point graduate. He was a student of strategy and had participated as a soldier in the Mexican-American War. His major problem was that he was too much of a perfectionist. He didn't want to needlessly waste men's lives, which is a good thing, but when you are the commander of an army, sometimes action is required, even if it means men's lives are at stake. So Lincoln, aggravated by how slow McClellan was, ordered McClellan into the field, ordered him to advance upon Richmond. So McClellan took his Army of the Potomac up the water route between the James and York River. The area in between is a peninsula, hence why this is called the Peninsula Campaign. Their end goal is to capture the Confederate capital of Richmond, obviously. The problem that McClellan faced in this Peninsula Campaign is he came into direct conflict with Robert E. Lee. Now, once again, Robert E. Lee gets the most press of all of the Confederate generals, but at least in the beginning of the war, he was only the Army general in charge of the Army of Northern Virginia. It's not till the very end of the war that he is commander-in-chief of all of the Confederate forces. But nonetheless, General Lee defended it pretty well during this Peninsula Campaign, and also the fact that some of McClellan's forces had to be diverted because Stonewall Jackson's troops were threatening D.C., lessened the manpower that McClellan had at his advantage. So Robert E. Lee then, using these numbers to his advantage, launched a counterattack during this Peninsula Campaign in the 7 Days Battle in 1862. This effectively pushed McClellan back to the sea. He had to retreat back to the sea and eventually back up to D.C. because he didn't have the manpower capable of defeating Lee at the battle, or the 7 Days Battle, I should say. This second major defeat for the Union Army, once again, refocused their attention. And now it is all going to be about total war. Everything is fair game in total war. And the Union has a 6-part strategy to win this war. Here you see both Lee and McClellan. And here you see where the Peninsula Campaign was. McClellan's forces coming down via the Chesapeake Bay and then up either the York River or up the James River. And this territory in between forms a peninsula. But eventually they were pushed back out to the sea. Okay, so here is that 6-part Union strategy that is determined after this failure at the Peninsula Campaign. First and foremost, parts 1 and 2 are known as the Anaconda Plan, so named by the military commander-in-chief at the time, Winfield Scott, who we remember from the Mexican-American War. It was called the Anaconda Plan because the goal was to surround the Confederacy and choke them out. So part 1 was to blockade the coast, order a naval blockade to block any imports or exports from the Confederacy, also so that the British or the French could not come to their aid. So blockading the coast starved them out economically. Part 2, take control of the Mississippi River to effectively cut the Confederacy in half so that Texas and the other western territories would wither on the vine. They could not get any reinforcements or supplies from one side of the Confederacy to the other. Also, by controlling the Mississippi River, the Union would be able to have access to any part of the Confederacy. They could float men, supplies, whatever it is, down the Mississippi River right into the heart of the Confederacy. Part 3, once again, is an economic focus to liberate the slaves and once again undermine the Confederacy's economy. Part 4, to send troops into the Carolinas and to Georgia, capture Richmond, and finally engage the enemy everywhere and force their submission. Total warfare implies everything is fair game. Military targets are not the only targets. Civilian targets, crops, whatever it is, are open to attack by the Union during the Civil War because they had to be brought back to the Union kicking and screaming. That was the only way it was going to happen. So, on to another battle, specifically the battle at Antietam Creek. Now, before we get to that, I'm sorry, the Second Battle of Bull Run also marks a defeat for the Union. At this time, Lee faced off against Union General John Pope. Pope was quickly defeated at the Second Battle of Bull Run, and with this third victory under the belt of the Confederacy, Lee decided to move his troops into Maryland. The goal was, by moving into Maryland, that this could spur the border states to secede. Remember, Maryland is a border state. They're only barely hanging on to the Union by a thread. They're under martial law. Remember, habeas corpus was suspended in Maryland. And his hope here is to spur the border states to secede and hopefully to also gain foreign intervention from other countries, that maybe Great Britain or France will come to their aid and supply them with troops or weapons or whatever it is. The problem is, though, that at the Battle of Antietam Creek, and this is the battle in Maryland, which is near Sharpsburg, Maryland, on September 17, 1862, the Union had one thing to their advantage, and this is crazy that this actually happened. But Lee's secret battle plan, basically his troop movement where troops were going to be stationed at this battle, was discovered by a Union runner from one camp to another. Apparently, a Confederate soldier had accidentally dropped the secret battle plans in a field, and randomly this Union soldier found them and took them to McClellan. So here's McClellan at the Battle of Antietam Creek. He has these secret plans. He knows exactly where all of the troops are going to be, what the goals are going to be, etc. And even having that, this accounts for one of the bloodiest days of fighting in the entire Civil War. Over 10,000 men were killed on each side during this one-day battle at Antietam Creek. Lee lost and was forced to retreat back across the Potomac River and into Virginia. So the Union won at the Battle of Antietam Creek, but just barely. And this is how close the Confederacy came to possibly winning this war. McClellan was fired from his job as the general in charge of the Army of the Potomac because more was expected from him. How could you barely squeak out a victory when you had his secret plans, thought Lincoln, and very rightly so. And the fact that he did not chase after Lee after he escaped also angered Lincoln as well. So the Battle of Antietam Creek, though, is another important battle simply because Lincoln used this victory, and victory here in quotes, to announce his preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. He says, by the way, guys, an Emancipation Proclamation is coming in a few short months. Now, he'd been thinking about this Emancipation Proclamation for a while, but he didn't want to announce it on the heels of a defeat for the Union Army, simply because he didn't want it to seem like they needed a slave revolt to win this war. He wanted to have a Union victory to announce this Emancipation Proclamation. Also, by this time, by late 1862, early 1863, the border states are squarely in their camp. They are secure to the Union. So he doesn't have to fear as much as he did in 1861 that the border states could possibly secede from the Union. So the official document was released January 1st, 1861, the Emancipation Proclamation, in which Lincoln said that the slaves would be forever free in all states and territories currently in rebellion. So what does this mean? The Emancipation Proclamation says nothing about the border states. So basically, if you lived in Maryland or any of the other border states, you were legally allowed to keep your slaves. Also, the territories of the Confederacy that had already been captured were not affected as well. This only applied to the territories and states currently in rebellion. So what did it actually do? Nothing in 1863. No slaves were actually emancipated in 1863. But what the Emancipation Proclamation did was strengthen the moral cause for the Union, gave them something to focus on. Also, this really started to squash any idea from foreign governments about intervening on the side of the Confederacy. Especially in Great Britain, there was a large abolitionist sentiment in Great Britain. And now that Lincoln has come out and openly said the North is against slavery, the South is obviously for slavery, Great Britain starts to back off because of the popular sentiment among the people in Great Britain. This also lays the groundwork for the coming 13th Amendment, which actually did abolish slavery. And in the North, there were mixed emotions with this Emancipation Proclamation. Many Northerners who are not necessarily siding one way or another on the issue of slavery said, wait a second, I thought this war was about renewing the Union or bringing the Union back together. Now, all of a sudden, it seems like it's going to be about slavery. So many people in the North felt that this was a trick on the part of Lincoln. And the border states felt like this is going way too far. Southerners were angry about this Emancipation Proclamation, even though they didn't recognize it as being legitimate. They felt that this was just Lincoln's attempt to start a slave revolt. So when the Emancipation Proclamation was announced and released, it actually didn't do anything, but it was laying the groundwork for the future amendment that did eventually abolish slavery. Okay. So after the firing of John Pope, after he lost at the Battle of the Second Battle of Bull Run, McClellan was restored, as we talked about. He was also fired again. So Lincoln is just going through general after general after general. So finally he comes to A.E. Burnside. A.E. Burnside once again replaced McClellan as the head of the Army of the Potomac after the Battle of Antietam. He told Lincoln he was unfit for the job. He was unprepared to lead this army, but Lincoln doesn't have anyone else. And so A.E. Burnside, as the new Army general in charge of the Army of the Potomac, launched an attack on Fredericksburg in Virginia. This was one of Lee's strongholds. Massive Union losses, 10,000 men dead at the Battle of Fredericksburg. He was quickly replaced once again by Joseph Hooker as the new commander of the Army of the Potomac. Joseph Hooker leading this army at the Battle of Chancellorsville, which is the precursor to Gettysburg. One major thing happened at the Battle of Chancellorsville between May 2nd and 4th of 1863. Stonewall Jackson, one of the leading Confederate generals, was killed by friendly fire, meaning his troops accidentally fired upon him and killed him. This is a huge loss for the Confederacy because he was, as Lee called him, my right arm. He was such an integral part to the Confederacy's cause. So the death of Stonewall Jackson seriously hurt the Confederacy's chances after the Battle of Chancellorsville. But even still, Lee is focused on bringing this war to the North. He wants Northerners to feel what this war is like. He felt that people would be less likely in the North to support this war if they felt the fighting going on around them, if their friends were being killed right around them, if their crops were being destroyed. So once again, Lee decided to bring this war north. He'd first attempted to try to do this with the Battle of Antietam into Maryland. Now he is going to attack Pennsylvania. So 3 days before the battle at Gettysburg, George Meade is named the general in charge of the Army of the Potomac. And so we see a huge force on the side of the Union Army, 92,000 men for the Union compared to 76,000 men for the Confederacy at Gettysburg. And this is the battle to try to bring the war northward by Lee. And this is between July 1st and 3rd of 1863. Now, at the Battle of Gettysburg, one major event, the unsuccessful attempt to charge up Cemetery Ridge. This was led by General George Pickett for the Confederacy. George Pickett and Pickett's charge tried to gain the high ground to try to gain a strategic advantage over the Union. He was unsuccessful, and this is considered the high water mark of the Confederacy. This is their last real chance of winning this war. From here on out, it's going to be a downward spiral for the Confederacy. They were pushed out of Pennsylvania at this point and back into the South, and this is the last time we will see this war come to the North. In the fall of 1863, Lincoln, along with several other dignitaries, traveled to the battleground at Gettysburg to dedicate a portion of the field to the war dead. And this is where Lincoln delivered his very famous Gettysburg Address, a 2-minute speech that he'd written on the back of a napkin on the way to Gettysburg. Is considered one of the most moving speeches ever given in United States history. And here is a picture of George Meade, and we will talk about the Western theater of war in part 2 to come.